Okay, so we've had videos on 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, combining 1 and 2-point perspective. Now we're going to do a video using 2-point perspective to make a much more complex shape. So same thing, I'm going to start with a line which separates sky from ground, horizon line or eye level. They're both the same, they're synonyms. I'm going to figure out this object that I want to draw, what is the box it would be delivered in. That's how I tend to think about whatever it is I want to draw if I'm going to be using perspective. So let's imagine that it is a upholstered chair. And I think, what would be the shape? Let's make it a sofa. What would be the shape a sofa would come in if it was boxed? So I think probably you're thinking a big rectangle. So I'm going to put 2 points on either end of the page. So I've got my point here and my point there. So I've got my 2 points on the page. Then I'm going to think, okay, this box is going to be delivered holding this sofa. So I'm going to put the corner, that line, which is the starting point for any 2-point perspective, and I'm going to just loosely, I could be using my ruler, so you can easily use a ruler if that makes you more comfortable. I don't mind freehanding. I think it's good practice to learn to sort of trust your hand, but in the same sense, if you'd like to use a ruler, feel free to use a ruler as well. So let me see, I'll do the bottom in a ruler like I did. So I'm going bottom corner to both vanishing points, and I'm going top corner to both vanishing points. So I'm looking at this sofa and I'm saying, okay, now I got to fit it in a box. So I'll come along this way and say there's the long side, and I'll just decide I want to cut it off, and I'm going to bring that line straight down. Verticals are all parallel in 2-point perspective. And I'm going to come along from this top corner of this box, and I want to go long side, short side. I'm going to make a guesstimate and bring another parallel vertical. Vertical, vertical, they should all be parallel. So starting at that front corner, I was going towards the long side in this direction. So when I get to the back, I want to change directions and head back to the opposite vanishing point. So if I'm looking at that opposite vanishing point, there we go, I got it in. We can use a freehand, I can use the ruler. I'm going to just lightly put that line in. I'm going to go down to the bottom, aligned vanishing point, bottom corner, and I'm going to do it again. Just put a very light line. I'm using light lines because I know I'm going to erase a lot. In fact, I picked up a H pencil, so I know that that's going to be making fairly light lines. So now I'm going to come back to my starting point, that front corner. I'll go to the short side. I went that direction to get to the short side, so I know when I get to the back, I'm going to change directions and go the other way. So once again, if I know that this is my starting point and I want to come towards the opposite vanishing point, I've lined it up, and I can just draw that line across and go to the bottom. Do the same thing. I'll just line it up to that far vanishing point. Put my light line through there. Hopefully when I look at, so here's where my freehand lines didn't exactly line up, but it's the back corner of that box. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up a darker pencil, and I'm going to just locate where some of those basic dimensions are, because I know I'm going to do a lot of erasing. but I'm going to pick that outside edge and make it dark. And then what I'm going to do is on this front, I'm going to just find a middle point. It's actually easier to do over here because there's less surface, so I'm just going to bisect corner to corner. So since I found this middle point, I know that this side was using the corresponding vanishing point, so I'm going to lay my ruler between vanishing point and that intersection of the X I did from corner to corner, and I'm going to bring it up to the front. So here's midpoint there. I'm going to bring it across to that end, the opposite vanishing point. There's midpoint there. Midpoint is going to be helpful because if this is a sofa, I'm assuming that it's probably going to have cushions. So I'm going to go to that other corner of the midpoint and bring a line back until it intersects. So I have that intersection. I'm going to change direction and go to my other vanishing point. And I'm going to bring a line from there across. So I know this is going to be where the seat goes. And at this point, I'm now going to relax a little bit and look at the actual sofa itself. So if I come to the front and I know that that is where my cushion is going to be, I'm going to find the midpoint of that. So I'm just going to go corner to corner. Bring that point up. It just happens to be one of the lines I have, only because it's overlapping a line. So I know there's the front of that. I'm going to bring that straight down because I don't think I want an enormous cushion the way across the front. So I'm just going to draw another loose line on the bottom. Now I'm going to start freehanding. So I want that cushion to feel a little bit loose. So I'm rounding the corners. I'm going to give it a little bit of poof. So suddenly my straight lines are becoming much more soft. So now that cushion just became much softer. I don't want this, oops, sorry, non-cooperative laptop. So what I want to do is I want to make these arms feel a little bit more curved and a little bit less hard angle. So I'm going to say that this is the end of one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this up and I'm going to pull a curve out right there. And then I'm going to bring that down. So what I just did is I actually extended this whole sofa. So I need that line on the bottom now that I had to continue till it intersects. So now if I take that line out, and erase that bottom because I just changed the dimension because I wanted this arm to feel soft. So I'm going to go from that corner back to my vanishing point. I'm going to go from this curve because by making this choice now, I've said that that's an intersection. So I'm going to lightly bring that back to the vanishing point. I'm going to go to the top of that, bring that back to the vanishing point. I'm going to erase this line in the middle here because it's going to disappear. So if I have a curve here, then I'm going to have, and this is where you could either cut a template or just use that curve that you already freehanded on the front. So now I've created that curve. If you happen to be someplace that you have a flexible curve, that's what this would be for. You could bend it around to one curve in order to replicate the curve again. So now I have this one arm on this side, but I need to make the arm over here feel the same way. So I have this one end of it, but what I need is this thickness. As it's closer to you, it's going to be a little bit wider, so when I come back here and I can do this visually, because you're looking at it, I decided that I made that a little bit narrower. I brought that line straight up. I need to know where the top of this curve is going to be, so I project from this curve back to that vanishing point, and I just put a light line there to help me figure out where it's going to be. I want to see where the bottom of this curve is, so again I come over there, make that light line. So what I've just done is I've decided top and bottom for where this curve is going to fit. Here's this width on this side, so I know that the curve starts here. So I'm actually just freehanding that curve in. So if I use those guidelines I put, that should be approximately this curve. We're not drafting, so I'm going to say that's okay. I'm going to go to this top edge. I'm going to go to the opposite vanishing point because I have to get the top of that arm. And I'm just going to lightly project that back. Now I'm going to start erasing again. I know I'm not going to need these lines, so I'm going to get some of those out of there. On this side, over here I can't see down in the corner, but over here I can, and I know that that was a curve, so I'm going to use this curve again just for that. And I don't know if you can see how this is starting to feel like upholstery. Since I know this was my middle point, I can bring that line straight up. I know that that's the middle point. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a loose curve right through this side to that side, and then I'm going to erase out those guidelines. So I'm going to start getting rid of so many of these guidelines that I don't need anymore. And now I sort of have this sofa that is beginning to feel believable, and the eraser I sent sailing across the floor. So let me grab another eraser. So let's continue to figure out how can I make this feel more natural. It still has a little bit of an angular feel to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and just keep erasing a little bit. Get rid of some of these things that I don't need. So if that means you know there's going to be some kind of something that's holding those cushions, so I can put another very light line in there. Let's see. Let's get rid of the big solid line on the bottom, and instead we'll make this sofa as though the legs are upholstered, but it comes up. There's space between the bottom of it and the floor. I just picked this point, so I can bring that across, going to my vanishing point. So now I can see that. That means I get a little corner over there of that far leg. So it's starting to look a little bit less harsh. Let's go ahead and I'm going to continue that cushion now because I can see a lot more since I removed that original cardboard box. Let's go ahead and throw about a big old soft pillow on it. In this case, that won't follow necessarily either of the vanishing points. Instead, it's just going to be an irregular shape. But we want to soften this and make this look a little bit more like something you might see in your house. So I'll come over here and I'll do the same thing. So I put a nice soft, overstuffed, curvy pillow sitting there at an angle askew in the corner of that other side of the sofa. Now it's starting to feel a little bit more realistic, and this began as a parallelogram. So let's have some fun. I'm going to actually give this sofa a pattern. So let's just add some stripes to it, because that gives me the ability to show some of the contour of this sofa. So if it has stripes, I go through and I add a little bit of value to those stripes. And I didn't measure, I didn't get all bent out of shape. And this stripe is not going to align necessarily to that cushion, but it probably would align as it comes down. So I can just put one, add some value to it. I know right next to it there'll be another one. Put a little value. So once again, I'm just taking these stripes that were running behind everything, because those cushions are separate, so they don't have the exact same stripes on them. So just bear with me as I work some of this in fast. So there might be some more stripes that fit in there. And then we'll pull some right over the top of this. That's a curve, so let's make the corresponding stripes that I'm adding to it also follow that curve. And when I bring it around the front, it's going to tuck in the bottom with a little bit of a curve. Starting to look a little bit more. And I have no clue, because I'm not a furniture designer, but let's just imagine that on the arms, the stripes change direction. So I'll just put a couple stripes rolling around that nice curve. And then it goes down and we see it come out after that. Since I did that, put that same curve that would be visible over here. So now that's starting to feel a lot more possible. Let's imagine that little piping stuff that you see in the front. And let's just say that they run on this fabric. There's another stripe that runs through that front. I truly don't know, but you would be looking at something. So I can do the same thing over here and just add that little bit of piping detail. And I can bring a stripe down through. It doesn't have to be in exactly the same place. And now if you did that and you cleaned up all these other lines, this is a fairly believable, in proportion, piece of upholstery that you used 2-point perspective to find it. And I didn't bother giving those pillows some kind of pattern, but who knows, they could get some kind of a different pattern. That would be up to whatever you were doing. But how you work with this would be up to you. But the nice thing is that because you are comfortable with perspective, you were able to use the perspective to get all of this to feel like it is more natural, that it's illusionistic. And again, if we were putting other pieces with it, so I'll just throw an ottoman in, let's say, and I'll use 1-point perspective. So let's say there's one of those big flat ottomans sitting out here in the room. Well, the end, in 1-point perspective, you start with a shape. The end of a big old upholstered ottoman would look like a rectangle, so I can go from my single vanishing point, look at how big or not big that ottoman is, give it some kind of little leg. Let's say it's sitting up on legs. If I wanted to tuft this, I'm doing this visually instead of using perspective to split it up. I'm projecting back towards that vanishing point. I gave it a nice curvy top. Just draw that curve again. And voila, I could create, if I worked with this, I could make it look like it has an upholstered top. If this was all in a solid value, I could just add a little bit of light and shadow modeling. And now I have a sofa in 2 point. I have an ottoman-like shape in 1 point, and they're existing together in a fairly illusionistic, realistic fashion. So the next video will be how to build an interior. So instead of putting a box around an object in order to find the shape of an object, we're going to put ourselves inside of a box in order to create the sense of a room.